Welcome and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Et bienvenue à tout le monde, to those of you calling in from the Francophone side of the world. Thank you for joining us today for today's webinar on philanthropic deserts in West and Francophone Africa, which I hope will be an insightful conversation with key representatives from Segal Family Foundation and the Gates Foundation. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kadi Silla. I serve as a director for Africa and the Middle East at Myriad USA. We're a philanthropic institution headquartered in New York that provides US donors, whether individuals, families, corporations, foundations, or advisors to philanthropists with a diverse set of services to support their international giving anywhere in the world. We also partner with nonprofits registered abroad and offer them solutions to receive tax-deductible donations from their donors in the United States through our American Friends Fund service. In 2025, we facilitated $95 million across 103 countries, up from $169 million in 2024 across 90 countries. We are very excited about this significant growth. Still, from where I sit on the Africa team, only a speck of this flow moves towards West and Francophone Africa, which unfortunately reflects a much broader global trend. We often hear that Africa is a rising continent, but when you look at the philanthropic data, a different story emerges. Less than 2% of global philanthropic funding reaches African-led organizations. And within that tiny sliver, West and Francophone Africa are often left in what we call philanthropic deserts. But a desert isn't empty. It is full of untapped potential, resilient leadership, and local innovation that often lacks the irrigation of capital. We're here today because giving in this region shouldn't feel like leaping into the unknown. Whether you are an individual donor committed to social impact, a diaspora donor looking to give back, a philanthropic advisor, or a large corporation, today is about shifting the narrative from risk to opportunity. We're joined by Dedo Enba and Nulufa Meman, two leaders representing Segal Family Foundation and the Gates Foundation, respectively. These funding institutions have decades of experience and insights into the region, and they see the landscape differently. One is building from the ground up through proximate leadership. The other is leveraging both local and global systems to reach the last mile. But before we dive in, allow me to share a couple of quick housekeeping reminders. Please use a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to share your questions. We've allocated some time at the end of this session to answer as many questions as possible, and some of my colleagues are also on this call and will be able to address some of the questions in the Q&A box. But in case we're not able to get to all the questions at the end, please add your name to the question so that we can follow up with you accordingly. Translation is also available through closed captioning. Click the Show Captions button in the Controls toolbar and select your preferred language. And I can tell you, for those of you who speak French, this will be very useful. Last but not least, the recording of this session will be shared with everyone who registered. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Let's dive in. Okay, let's start with Dedo. Dedo, let's start with you. Right now, you serve as the interim executive director of the Segal Family Foundation. However, I know you've been at Segal since its startup days, and you've seen the foundation going through different funding journeys that began in East Africa. Today, Segal is a pioneer not only in the volume of its funding, but also in advancing a narrative that is changing the philanthropy by funding proximate leadership and early stage organizations through unrestricted, trust-based philanthropy. The foundation has now expanded in West Africa. Congratulations, Francophone and West Africa. Given this history of the foundation and your time there, can you tell us what is the most common mistake donors, especially US donors, make when they're trying to apply the East Africa funding lens to West Africa? Thank you.
Hi, Kadi. Let me start by saying how I appreciate your metaphor or analogy on the desert. I'm calling in from Copenhagen, where I'm attending the Philea conference, and there's so much talk about climate, and I wanted to first appreciate the work that you do to improve climate, and particularly in places like West Africa that are often overlooked. I wouldn't call it mistakes that funders make. I think for anyone who's been long enough in this industry, we know that philanthropy tends to follow visibility, language familiarity, and existing networks, not necessarily opportunity. It is also true that a disproportionate amount of philanthropic capital in Africa flows towards East Africa, Anglophone countries, and mature impact and NGO ecosystem. In that sense, Francophone Africa for far too long continues to suffer a visibility challenge due to language barrier, which creates a proximity barrier. And for all these reasons, it's a region that remains characterized by a weak philanthropic infrastructure and underdeveloped intermediary networks. And all those are the reasons why a year ago we decided, in partnership with a few of our funder friends, as Nike says, to just do it, to build an infrastructure and service that others can easily piggyback on. And there's no magic. Like in other parts of Africa, talent exists, solution exists, but storytelling and capital pipeline often do not. And that's what we hope with others we can change. Segal Family Foundation built its reputation in the Great Lakes, in East Africa, Southern Africa, by backing proximate leaders before they became visible to mainstream philanthropy. So today we are applying the same recipe to Francophone Africa, and others can do it too.
Thank you for that. I love the visibility. I love the going together, the journey, and the collaborations. I do have a follow-up question on that, actually. Um, Given this recent expansion of the Segal Family Foundation in Francophone Africa, particularly in Senegal, Togo, DRC, and other countries, what were some of the challenges, some of the things that you've encountered in these regions that have challenged your previous assumptions about how good development looks different, or how good development should look like in Francophone context? So what did you assume a Segal Family Foundation and some of the peer funders that you work with, you come into the region and development, it challenges that assumption?
We have looked at this region for many years, for close to a decade, and figuring out what was going to be our point of entry. And since this is a place where there is a lack of philanthropic capital, it was very clear that we could not do it alone, that we needed to do it with others. And we first realized that, in existing infrastructures and ecosystems such as East Africa, where there's an abundant capital and sophisticated impact and entrepreneur ecosystem, it's easy to just go in and then do what you need to do. But in West Africa, we realized that it's really important to do it with others. They often say, I can't help use this never tired African proverb, which says, if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go with others. So with working with others, and especially the mighty Gates Foundation and other big foundation and seasoned facilitators such as yourselves at Myriad, I think we have an opportunity now to not only go fast, but also far in changing the status of this impact ecosystem and leaders across Francophone West Africa. Some of the challenges are simply around language. Philanthropy is predominantly sophisticated in Anglophone world and in Francophone portfolios where you have a traditional sort of government to government giving, and the civil society that for far too long has been dominated by larger and foreign organizations. There's little space and little investment that has gone into building vibrant civil society that are locally led. So some of the things, I wouldn't call it something that has challenges, but we have seen how what worked in other places is also what's going to work in Francophone Africa. And then I want to challenge a little bit the sort of notion that Francophone West Africa is riskier than elsewhere. The same thing that works everywhere is the same thing that works in Francophone Africa. Bring capital, bring connections, and bring donor networks that get involved. I wouldn't say that there's any particular challenge other than simply figuring out how do you start and how do you open it up for others to also come in. But of course, language is biggest challenge. Philanthropy has English as its first language, And in Francophone West Africa, we're seeing a little bit more of that challenge, where you see the sophistication of reporting mechanism or clear and clean-cut models that are in East Africa. In West Africa, you still see people who are trying to articulate what they do, but it doesn't mean that what they do is not as powerful or impactful or bold, but it just needs language around it. But I wouldn't think of anything that particularly challenge our assumptions. We knew what we were getting in, that these are virgin and emerging markets that need pretty much almost everything. Capital alone can't cut it. Coming with capacity building and networks is paying over time.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. And correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm hearing is really the time before even coming in is the time that Segal spent in investigating what's working, what isn't. How do you come in, and with whom do you come in, and what that journey would look like. Systems that could be leveraged, but also those that can be built. So thank you for clarifying that. Speaking of, if you want to go fast, do it together, let's bring in Nulufer. This is something that the Segal Family Foundation, I'm sorry, the Gates Foundation has completely leveraged with over 2 decades of impact, transformative impact on the health systems in Nigeria, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Chad, and many other Francophone African countries. The Gates Foundation has really served as a systems multiplier, building infrastructure and working very closely, as Dedo mentioned before, with civil society, local government, as well as service deliver. Those are delivering services at scale. So Nulufer, I want to turn to you for a minute. Could you help us understand, giving the incredibly large ecosystem that the Gates Foundation has built in the region, why should individual and DAF donors consider giving towards West Africa? And what kind of impact do you think they can hope to achieve through their giving mechanism? Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Once again, thank you for doing this. I think it's so important to start talking about philanthropy deserts with a very clear-eyed approach. And also, I really appreciate this conversation with Data, because we're such different funders in the way that we approach the field, but we have the same mission. And I think that kind of a conversation is always set up where, we can learn from each other. So thank you. I appreciate it. Before I answer this question, I also just want to say that the people who are best positioned to answer these questions are the people in our African offices doing the work. I am only being a mouthpiece and channeling their wisdom. So I want to give credit where it's due. But this is a really interesting question, and I think the answer lies in the context, right? In 2023, USAID promised $12 billion to the African continent. 2025, that has been cut off. Now, there is no way that philanthropy can replace that scale, and nobody should pretend that it can. But what it can do is that it can shape what comes next, right? And for people, I think, especially when you ask me about individuals and DAP donors, they should not underestimate the impact that they can create in this ecosystem, because it is disproportionate. And that is because the field is so thin. I used to be a partner with the Britspan Group before I joined the foundation, and we did a lot of landscaping. And we found that even to this date, the giving of large gifts in Africa is way less than it is in the US or even in India now. So giving in itself, I think you're playing in a field where the quantum of giving is less, as when you compare it to the need. Now, what can donors really achieve? I think 3 things, right? First, the kind of work that the Gates Foundation does, or other sort of big strategic philanthropists do with governments, it does not really reach the kind of, very small, proximate organizations that also require funding to create a vibrant ecosystem. So that funding will come from individuals, from DAF donors, and with the help of intermediaries like yourself. Second is there is no substitute for unrestricted and trust-based funding. And when funders give programmatically, they do have to sort of tie it to very specific outcomes. There is merit in that kind of funding, but it's very different from the trust-based giving. I spoke to someone last year from the Luala Foundation in Luala in Kenya, and he said, I would rather run a 5 million organization with unrestricted funds than a 20 million organization with restricted funds. So just to say that the dollar that is not tied to anything goes really far. So even if an organization is receiving money from the Gates Foundation, the money that will come from individuals and DAF donors, it will help them. It will help them build their organization capacity. It will help them hire more people. It will help them get an AI app, and we should not underestimate that impact, especially in these kind of scarcity contexts. And then finally, I will say that, and this is a repetition to what Dado said, is that it's not very complex. Like there is infrastructure available. There are intermediaries like yourself who can handle the due diligence, who can handle the compliance, who can handle the French language navigation. So if you think that, oh, this is going to be so hard, why don't I just, do it later or not do it? Don't get into that trap. Give the money today and and get that impact in place.
Thank you. So spot on. And I've heard both of you looking at where the gaps are, but also where the opportunities can be leveraged effectively. And I agree with you, Nilofer, the contrast between your funding models, meaning Segal Family Foundation and the Gates Foundation, couldn't be more stark, and yet it's the same mission. So I do have a question that I want both of you to share. Giving your distinct funding models, right? Like as we said before, Segal is looking at it from a proximate leadership angle, early stage approach, and Gates is a systems multiplier at scale. What is the one specific blind spot each of you has encountered in the Francophone ecosystem that the other one is better equipped to fix? I'll start with Dado and come to Nilofer.
God, blind spot. As I said earlier, I don't think it's necessarily a blind spot, but this, thinking that we all have to live by in philanthropy, that it takes a village. Gosh, I'm doubling down on my African proverbs. It does take a village in places like Francophone Africa, where we need all hands on deck, people who are coming in at building infrastructure for proximate leaders to thrive, and where you bring in really solid intermediaries that are facilitating conversation across spectrum to larger and mezzanine founders who are going to take all these initiatives to a bigger scale. I continue to see the state of impact ecosystem in Francophone Africa, and I mean, even if its size, requiring a little bit more bold and intentional strategic approach and consolidated efforts. So all these are things that we have learned and have experience in doing in other geographies, and critical issues that I think could also be applicable to Francophone Africa. Not so much as a blind spot, but simply a nuance and a little bit more bold and a little bit more practical way of doing business. The blind spots aren't a question, but rather what are some of the leverages that we have seen work in other markets that are applicable in West Africa. So if I have to be a little bit more pressed on your question, our own blind spot was that often we just go in and we do what we need to do, and hoping that there's going to be other funders who are going to come and take all the work that is done of these social entrepreneurs across this market and take it to other level, which is our experience in other markets. We were lucky that eventually others do come, but we are realizing in Francophone Africa that there is additional effort to bring the ecosystem, bring donors network as we start to open up this portfolio. That's one of the key sort of realization and blind spots that I think we sort of knew, but now we responding to with intention and with strategy. As we go in funding intermediaries and local champions and groups that are delivering social impact, but do the same kind of effort on the other side of the spectrum with funders to cultivate familiarity and experience and excitement for the region.
Yeah, no, exactly. I was thinking about it in a similar fashion. You have the Segal, that's really, again, early stage, trust-based philanthropy, unrestricted, accompaniment, that's very important, the capacity building, the ecosystem building. And you have the gates at the multiplier level. And yet, I'm curious to know, Dedo, once those cohorts have matured enough to exit, there are somewhere that is not captured by the Gates Foundation. They're not mature enough to be captured, and yet they're not young enough to stay with Segal. So if you can tell me a bit more, it's not a blind spot, I agree per se, but there's something missing, and I really appreciate you underscoring the need of intermediaries to stepping in, not only to continue the accompaniment, but also as a way of diversifying funding streams, because in a way, that's the role that MIRDUSA plays, right? Like offering these services to nonprofit organizations to be able to tap into the individual donor markets and sustain that partnerships with their donors. But curious to know what you think of it.
So here's a best case scenario. As we build portfolios, as we provide capacity building opportunities for organizations to thrive and to be great, how do we also bring in a capital stack that allows them to grow in their own terms, recognizing the fact that our giving, we are a sort of early stage funder. We go in when the DNA of these groups and organizations is forming, but we are cognizant of the fact that we're not what's going to take them to a bigger scale. So we are doubling down on the effort of bringing in others. Throughout the year, we organize donor trips where we invite other donors to come to learn and to celebrate and to find their point of entry. And as we do that, we're also finding ways where these portfolios we're going to get additional capacity support. The capacity support that they need as they start is not the capacity support that they need as they grow. How do you work with facilitators such as yourselves at Myriad to continue to advocate for a fuller investment framework that takes into account the capacity that is needed at different levels, the capital pipeline that is required to see the progression and the growth of this organization, and also funders that are progressive and agile to fund before these groups and organizations are perfect, because that's what's going to make them perfect. So we are advocating for a 360-degree investment framework that brings in capital, capacity, and connection, and that opens the door for others to come in and to find their own niche.
Thank you. Niloufar, over to you. Would love to hear from you what some of these blind spots that the Gates Foundation is saying and where you feel others are better equipped to take it forward.
Yeah, unlike Dero, I'm also going to contest the word blind spot. I think it is very much like a giving strategy or a philosophy. Everyone has a different strategy. I think the Gates giving strategy is sort of anchored in the fact that we should do what we are best positioned to do, and we should partner for the other things. And we should leverage or crowd in capital for things where we're not going to be able to put in all that money. So solution creation is our forte, right? Like when we think of, R&D, when we think of developing products, whether that is to save, moms and babies in these regions where maternal mortality is exponentially high, those products are not available in these countries. So can we develop products at a price point that can save moms and babies in these countries? That's where we want to put our capital. And we want to partner with other donors and other organizations for the delivery part of it. That is something where we seek partnerships. And we think that is a sound strategy because R&D is extremely expensive. Product development is really expensive. So for a funder who has that kind of giving capacity, and who has that sort of know-how in understanding R&D in an LMIC context, it's, you put your money where your mouth is, right? But that does leave like many areas with no coverage. And one might call that a blind spot, even if I don't. Um, and I think, but I think what that does is it establishes the point very clearly that the days of working in silos have to go. It is just not going to be, we're just not going to be able to, um, deploy a response to the kind of scarcity that has occurred right now with the entire backlash, aid, completely disappearing from these regions if we do not work well and if we do not create pipelines of organizations that can uh, help take these innovations to scale. And for that pipeline, we need someone like Segal, right? Like we need like the big bang philanthropies of the world. We need smaller organizations who can take these innovations that are being developed, whether it is for postpartum hemorrhage, where like a $1 sheet can save a mother's life, right? Like, I just think that there are so many amazing products, but they have to reach the homes where babies are being born and where mothers are receiving nutrients, and that work will only be done by proximate organizations on the ground, and we might not be able to give birth to those proximate organizations, and we need other funders to do that. So I think that is sort of a very differentiated role that the Gates Foundation especially plays when you look at other philanthropists on the field. I think it's essential that they both exist together because at the end of the day, small organizations, and this is to your point, Katie, are very fragile, right? And they are doing transformative work at the community level, but they're often dependent on single funders, or they don't have the kind of resilience to survive grant cycles and funding cliffs, etc. So if your enabling infrastructure is strong, if the government can absorb some of your work, if the government is strong enough that you're saving on costs, you become more resilient. It is mutually enforcing. So if you build a strong system, the organizations thrive. And if you don't build a strong system, the organizations on their own really have to. It's like when the heart is strong, you can move faster, right? So in many ways, I think they are mutually enforcing and they need to exist together. And people need to think of it as a systems play that will not function effectively if you don't have a vibrant civil society.
Katie,
Yeah,
can
no,
I double click
please come
on?
in. Yes. Yeah.
I would like to double click. No, thank you, Nilüfer, for talking about the enabling ecosystem and infrastructure. I think we have a tremendous opportunity to all think about how to solve problems in a way that uses an ecosystem lens to
Yeah.
solve all these issues around fragility of organization, fragility of intermediaries, and fragility of the entire impact ecosystem. Right now, there is a possibility for foundations like us and others to not see it as a huge problem, but see it as an opportunity that we can use creativity to solve. What I mean by this is that foundations don't have to change all their giving strategy. Devoting simply perhaps a percentage of their giving and their budget to this ecosystem as innovation. Think about any other big foundations if they devoted 5% of their giving for innovations to build a vibrant, solid, and stable infrastructure in Francophone West Africa. This does not compromise all the work that is being done. It is simply devoting a little bit more budget to build these ecosystem, and then that is possible because there is already existing Intel networks that are on the ground. There is already existing relationships that are simply looking for this sort of catalytic investment to create magic.
And that's exactly where I was going in terms of the role of philanthropy whatever its size, but especially where it's not able to fund anything at scale, but that catalytic impact it can have on innovation, the testing, the piloting of solutions, and eventually leading to scale that the gates often look to multiply. This is such a good conversation. I want to be mindful of time because we can go in so many rabbit holes. Okay, so here is a question. I want to sort of transition the conversation a bit more towards risk and barriers and how we may be able to close some of these gaps that you've all been so grateful in sharing with us. This question is really around the role of intermediaries. Again, like Myriad USA, I feel personally, as somebody who's sitting at the Africa portfolio, we certainly can do much more, much better in providing donors the information necessary, the insights that they need, and the possibilities to engage in contexts that they might not be able to understand, whether that's language barrier or whatnot, but certainly help guide people in that direction. So question then is, how much is the funding gap in Francophone Africa a result of actual risk versus simply a lack of language competency or cultural bridge building in the US? And so I guess my main question here is for DAF holders, foundations, or diaspora donors, who wish to take action in their giving. They actually want to do something, but they have concerns around the cross-border giving compliance, the language barrier. What are some of the, what are three must-haves that intermediaries like Myriad DSA with the local expertise, how can we use that to help donors overcome these concerns of cross-border giving compliance or language barriers? What are the three things we should consider providing? Dada, we'll start with you and then I'll come to
Kadi, I think that the funding gap that exists as we talk about it is rather a coordination gap. There are too many traditional cooks in the kitchen working in with show tourism, as we were saying earlier, and in silos, as Nilufar mentioned. And I think that there is nothing that a little bit more visibility and a little bit more proximity and a little bit more intel from existing networks that can fix. And what is often labeled as risk, I think, is simply, as you put it, simply distance, linguistic, cultural, and relational, to which we are addressing by building teams on the ground and the shared infrastructure that is going to allow us to find, fund, connect, and promote Francophone talents, groups, and leading impact. And we also want to do that while increasing also donor intel networks as well. So I don't necessarily see it as gap or as risk, because with a population size of over 250 million people, younger and dynamic, this is a massive opportunity that exists in Francophone Africa. And that's what I think we need to make contagious in funder cycles that are still on the fence.
And what before Nilufer, before you come in, Dedo, I'm going to push back a little bit. I agree with you, but at the end of the day, intermediaries like Myriad USA, yes, we have the local expertise, no doubt. I am from Francophone Africa myself, but I don't live there. I'm away from the field. I'm in touch with partners. We have incredible nonprofit organizations. How do I synthesize that information for donors that are seeking to understand better? How do I give effectively, impactfully? What do I need to give them to remove some of the concerns that they might have, again, around compliance or language barrier? Because at the end of the day, people that want to engage, that want to act, and are lacking information, would not, like, it's not fair to expect anything different. What can we do to lower the barriers of entry?
I think there are better ways we can improve visibility in changing the stories that we tell about this region, from risk to opportunity. That's one. And second, in finding local champions that don't have access to the Anglophone world of philanthropy and bringing them into our circles and expanding the table to ask them the questions around how are we to solve these problems, which doesn't often happen. When you go to many conferences, it's mostly people who are Anglophone and who have experience in philanthropy, which we know is still burgeoning in Francophone Africa. So that's one, around improving visibility. Second, I think we have to pay it forward. We have to start doing it and invite others to be on the ground. One of the most challenging and extremely rewarding part of my job since last year is taking funders and anyone with interest in Senegal, in Benin, in Togo, sharing food, sharing stories, and meeting people who are doing incredible amount of stuff. Those two combined, visibility and proximity, increases familiarity and excitement. And I think that's how we could continue to expand on bridging that gap. As well as tapping into local networks and sharing that there's big opportunities for them to start latching on. I am seeing left and right in DRC, in Burundi, in Mali, in Senegal, in Togo, in Guinea, lots of people who are doing this kind of work, but who don't know that there's a bigger world of philanthropy. Because what they have known so far has been your traditional sector of multilateral organizations, bilateral organizations, and NGOs that occupy a bigger space, but that is not there anymore. Now, humanity doesn't like vacuum. What is replacing that? It's our responsibility to now start going on the ground, telling different stories, and sharing it a little bit more and presenting the size of the opportunity rather than risk. And I think there's a tremendous amount of people and organizations that are doing that we can continue to bring into our world for to enhance our understanding and
Yeah,
our sense of risk.
thank you. So spot on. I'm coming on the next trip. Lulufer?
No, I think I would just plus one everything that Dado said. I think this is not a real risk or it's just structural bias, right? I want to say it plainly. There is a struggle in establishing networks and partnerships with Anglophone funding bodies in the global north. And that leads to these sentences around, oh, no French language due diligence capacity, no existing relationships, no trusted intermediary. What this all means is that we don't know how to work here, but that is very solvable. And now I think with AI, like actually everything is solvable. But I will also say that one of the reasons, this is the reason we're calling this a philanthropy desert is because it is the opposite of donor darling. You know, that is another word in the sector. Rwanda is a donor darling. And these terms should not exist because where there is need, there should be money. Philanthropy is basically the love of people, right? Like, so there should be money where there is need. And the reason that, everybody wants to go to one country and no, because whatever, it's easy to work there. I think those rhetorics are just so stale that it is a shame that, we have to be here as donors and talk about philanthropy deserts, right? So I appreciate the sort of conversation around individuals and DAF donors and how they might want to give in, but also institutional philanthropy needs to do more. I mean, the reason we're able to operate at a lot of scale in Senegal, like we have an office there in Niger, in Burkina, in Mali, is because there are great systems and great leaders who are doing the work. The reason that Dado and Segal are able to do work in Togo and Benin and Senegal again is because there are great organizations and there are great people, but all the donors also have to think like that, not just individuals. And I think I really appreciate the work that Patchwork is starting to do on this Patchwork Collective. We're partners with them. They're thinking of philanthropy deserts very intentionally. So I'm glad that we are having the conversation because it is not that sentence that I said, no, we don't know how to work here. That is a donor problem. It's not an organization problem, right? So we have to fix it. Yeah.
Okay, this is again, be mindful of time. We can go in so many rabbit holes. I want to bring this all together. I cannot thank you both enough for your incredible insights, practical and authenticity with which you speak. So thank you again. Um, so if we wanted to close the philanthropic desert gap, the solution, again, the desert is alive, lots of possibilities there. But if we wanted to move the needle, let's say from the 2% overall that's going to African-led institutions, East or West, West Africa even less. But let's say we want to move from the 2% to the 10% of global funding reaching African-led organizations. What is one radical change in funding decision, whether that's grant making or funding decision making? Segal is already doing a lot of this, the Gates to a very large extent, whether that's unrestricted funding, shifting power to the intermediary layer, both global and local. What should be the new standard beyond all of these things? The intermediary education, the donor education, yes, what should be the new standard there? Nuluf, I'll start with you and then end with Dado.
When you say 2 to 10%, Katie, that is radical. So the
I
solution
did say
should
a radical.
Yeah, so the solution should be radical, right? And I think for us, in our work, what we've seen working really well is pooled funding, is collaboratives. When donors come together with very similar values. So I think the values are bias to action. Let's not just sit and talk about it, work towards it. Bias to proximity, like truly like empowerment lies in the hands of local leaders and decision making needs to be made. We can guide and provide data and strategy help, but the work really has to be led through proximate partnerships. I think that's an important value. And third, like actually like big bets, right? Like big money, come in with big money. And we've seen that work really well with the Beginnings Fund in East Africa, where a lot of like big donors came in 500 million, big shift in the way that healthcare will be delivered for maternal and newborn mortality outcomes. We're trying to do a similar thing in West Africa. And the reason why I started having this conversation with you, Katie, in the first place was because I was like, why does nobody want to give to this region? It's been so hard for me to have conversations where folks are like, they're like, yeah, we know the need is bad. Yeah, we know this, we know that, but sorry, So I think for me, honestly, these conversations have come from a place of frustration that why do we even have this term philanthropy desert and donor darling? Where there is need, there should be money. And we find pool funds to be like a really good way because it de-risks it for the other donors. Every donor brings their sort of, strategic advantage, whether that is relationships, whether that is resources, whether that is governance and so on. But you actually hand the power in the hands of a proximate organization. And we've had such amazing experience working with Alima, which is a great organization in Senegal, and CBD in Mali, who are big organizations, but just such a strong proximate lens, a strong commitment to government partnerships, strong commitment to local partnerships, and community health workers on the ground. So if you want to if you want that shift, you have to go big, right? So that's the one specific mechanism that I've seen work really well. There's data to prove it, and that's the one I would advocate for.
Thank you. So what a beautiful 360. Go big and go together. The emphasis on collaborative fun. I love it. Dado, over to you.
Listen, this is why I like to work with both of you because you're not timid about using words such as radical. And I think that's what we need to do and to be pragmatic as well. And what do we need to do? I think we have to move from talk to traction, and I truly believe that the next generation of African organizations and institutions may very well emerge from regions that philanthropy has historically overlooked because they're designing models in this new reality, in this new world order where funding, philosophies, culture, and experience have shifted. And I sense that groups and organizations in Francophone Africa are going to leapfrog to be more resilient and much more sustainable compared to their East and Southern Africa counterpart. We just have to be bold and pay it forward. So for that to happen, agility, speed, nimbleness are going to be values that guide foundations, intermediaries, and doers themselves. So for funders, we cannot continue to ask African organizations to solve generational problems while we're starving them from flexible capital. We have to use trust-based lens and have a skin in the game, provide unrestricted funding, as you pointed out, and provide multi-year support and funding organization before they're perfect, because that's what's going to make them perfect. And for intermediaries, we do salute those that truly understand that best intermediaries do not merely move money, they translate trust and all the things that we can do right now.
Wow. Okay. So I think that's a wonderful segue into our next questions because it really ties into that local intermediary theme that you've both highlighted throughout the conversation. We have a really good question. First of all, let me thank the participants who actually asked these questions a week ago. We're so impressed, so organized. So thank you for that. There is one question from Africa Forward Advisory Group that is asking about your strategies, right? Like, so based on your strategies, the question is, how do you view the role of small to medium-sized African philanthropy in that strategy, particularly when it comes to like opportunities to scale at home initiatives? So whether that's the incubation part, the facilitation, the translating of trust at a local level. Nilufer, let's start with you and then go to Dado.
I think this is this is similar to the first question I answered, right? I think everyone has a really critical role to play. What the really and I think it depends on what the giving strategy is. I don't think there is a replacement for local philanthropy in general that signals credibility, right? So even, when a local donor, a local champion, whether that has, and I saw a question in the Q&A about corporate, whether that is especially corporates and, high net worth individuals who are based in the region, when they come forward and they put in the money, that signals a huge commitment. It not only encourages giving, I think it really encourages trust in that giving, which goes farther. So just to say that everyone has a role. There is a role that Gates Foundation plays. There are many others that the Gates Foundation does not play. There is a role that Segal plays, and there are many others that Segal doesn't play. And it is really for all of these other foundations to fill that gap if we truly want to see impact at scale and at a population level.
Amazing.
Yep.
Thank you. Yep. Dado, did you want to come in?
Yep, I could not agree more on the role of local philanthropy. They have been doing this since times immemorial with humility, and they have a tremendous role in providing intel and helping all of us know where potential is and where real risk is and how to mitigate that. And perhaps what we can encourage them to do is to not only work downstream on the things that they have been doing, but to also work upstream to be bold and to be strategic in their invitation of other private and foreign philanthropy to come in a place that they have already organized, in a place where actually will create maximum value so that we don't start from scratch. And I also see them playing a connecting role because philanthropy does not exist in a vacuum of politics and of government. Local philanthropy has the trust, the relationships, and experience of engaging with government, which we don't necessarily have the leverage, the power, and the credibility to do in new markets. And that is a place where they can connect the dots and connecting the work that is happening in the impact space to the work that the government is doing to create better opportunities.
Yeah, thank you. There is actually a very good question here that is, since we're talking Francophone Africa, including Central and West Africa here in a way, there's also the North Africa piece of Francophone Africa that we should not forget. And I so appreciate this question from Kamal Fizazi from the Azimuth Consulting. And the question is really around your experience. What is your experience with the Francophone North African context? And do you see any regional barriers or West African synergies that's influencing your engagement there in the North African region of Francophone Africa?
I like this question. It's a
Me
reminder
too.
of my personal and also Segal's sort of guiding vision and philosophy around how do we build the largest network of interconnected donors and doers from across Sub-Saharan Africa, north, south, east, west. I see the same similarity. Across Sub-Saharan Africa, it's fair to say that we haven't had the experience of having a tailored and catalytic capital. That is the reality in from across Sub-Saharan Africa with varying degrees. And with that in mind, I think it's fair to say that, for West Africa as well, for Northern Africa as well, I think the same recipe and ingredients are necessary. Is using time and treasure, bring capital first and capacity where it's needed, and community and connection to all these doers from Northern Africa as well, and seed resource for them to connect with their counterpart in East, Southern, and Southern Africa. One of the worst thing that have happened with colonization is that Africa is so fragmented that folks in East Africa have a harder time connecting in West Africa or Northern Africa, and etc. As Nilufar said earlier, these are things that are now easier, leveraging technology and using the power of philanthropy to just do it because we can easily do it.
Yeah, I want to
Nilufer?
honestly acknowledge that we do not work in the Maghreb region. I think we have just consolidated our presence in our West Africa region, and we see there is a lot of work still to be done, and we want to be focused on those countries. I will say though, given sort of my past experience of working in collaboratives, that sub-regional collaboratives work better than pan-country, pan-continent collaboratives. Like a West Africa fund would look very different from like an Africa fund, right? So having that kind of specificity to the work that needs to happen, taking into account and acknowledging that there are differences in the way that, funders think about certain regions, that the giving patterns differ, the kind of needs that need to be supported will change. So I think that reality and context is very critical. Even when you think of collaboratives, it cannot be like a broad stroke approach of let's collaborate and fund 52 countries. And that kind of like, I think bringing specificity and thoughtfulness to the interventions that you design lead to that radical change that we've been talking about, Katie.
Yeah, no, I agree with both of you. I so appreciate Dedo sharing earlier the time that Siegel took to understand the Francophone West Africa region before even coming in, like the levers to explore. I think it would be the same here. And I think that ties into what you're saying, Nilofer, in terms of looking at it not as a broad stroke, but what are the existing levers that could be leveraged effectively and can go far in terms of impact than just creating a template that might not be relevant for specific countries. And that also ties into Dado's mention of the legacy of colonialism in Africa, the fragmentation. It's difficult. So it has to be quite unique in terms of approach while understanding that there are synergies that also exist. So thank you for that.
So,
Sorry, come in.
Here's another idea. If there's any funders listening, what if we all decided to say, here is the percentage of our giving that is going to build ecosystems in Southern Africa, and here is the percentage of our giving that is going to go to West Africa, and here is the percentage that goes to West and going to the North. Not trying to fix all the problems ourselves, but also recognizing the fact that in doing that, it helps us fill all those gaps and do it with others as well. I think that might be fun.
That is radical. And there's no AI. I just want to clarify that thing hallucinates. So for the French speakers, please be careful when you use that AI system. Okay, so a really good question from the Disability Rights Fund. And I can personally relate to this because indeed the West Francophone Africa ecosystem, from a policy standpoint, is quite progressive. There are a lot of things on the books, the law, protecting the rights of people, especially those living with disability, and so on and so forth. And yet there is a huge implementation gap. So there is a good question from the Disability Rights Fund here asking, where do progressive legal frameworks for disability exist right now in your strategy? How are you looking at it in your portfolio? And how are you thinking of the lack of enforcement, frankly, in Francophone Africa that has these policies on the books? But again, the implementation gap is massive. So how are you thinking about it in your funding portfolio? And how do you prioritize that? Nilofer, we'll start with you and then transition to Dedo.
I have a disappointing answer, but it just proves this whole point that that we cannot work in silos anymore, right? Like our focus is on maternal health, it's on child health, it's on building health systems, it's on immunization. But sadly, disability rights is not in our portfolio. So it's slipped through a crack, which is why one philanthropist or five big philanthropists cannot do all the work. It's exactly what we've been talking about. So I would imagine that, a donor who wants to give to the region, if they're really able to like spend some time talking to a consultant or talking to somebody who really knows the field and they care about neglectedness, like as a metric for giving, right? Which is that this area does not receive the attention. They will be able to give to that right issue area because what our listener is saying is absolutely correct. Like everything exists except the money. And somehow we are living in the richest world that has ever been. That should be solvable. So yeah, to my point that Gates does not work on disability rights, it is really important to acknowledge it, and which is the reason why we should work together.
Thank you. Dedo?
I might have a satisfying answer than Nolifer. At Segal Family Foundation, we are sector agnostic because we are recognizant of the fact that the vulnerability across all these for populations that have been underserved are interdependent and interconnected. So we're looking for leaders and who are building organizations that are going to solve all these problems. So we have a burgeoning and growing disability portfolio that we are really happy to continue to support and to promote. And we do that in a way that also keeps lights on in terms of our advocacy for other founders to find ways to get involved. And I think it's a responsibility of all of us and those who do not fund the sector to continuously also look beyond our corners and find others who are providing that type of resource, because that's the beauty of philanthropy. We have the luxury and the privilege of having large intel networks and connections that we can continue to, even if it's not necessarily sectors that we are involved in, to advocate for those sectors with other donors, since we have an easier access. And that's a role that our foundation continues to take with pride, and that we encourage others to do.
Wow, what a great timing. And I'm so sorry to all of our incredible participants with so many good questions. But as I mentioned before, we will make sure to get back to you on some of those questions. Dedo and Nilofer, thank you so much for lending us your expertise, your insights, and so many takeaways. And thank you all for joining us. We look forward to staying in touch and be on the lookout for the recording in our next webinar. Thank you all for being here. Maybe we want to unmute our speakers and thank all of any last words. Thank you.
No, thank you, Kadi, for having Nilofer and myself. It was truly an honor to share this learning space with you all. I tremendously admire your constant work and expertise in facilitating giving, and you surely do it in a way that continues to uncover new areas and new frontiers that are often overlooked.
Absolutely. Plus one, absolute pleasure to share this stage with Dado and Katie, but also to such an amazing audience. I mean, these questions are so thought-provoking. I was just running through them and I just realized that we haven't really done it half the justice it deserves.
Agreed.
So hopefully, like more of these sessions, and we can come with more insights and learn more. So really appreciate it.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. West Africa, Francophone Africa 2.0. Bye, everyone. We'll be in touch.
Thank
Francophone
you.
Africa is ready for business. Let's do it. Au revoir. Ciao.